Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're going on a seriously satisfying journey inside that box sitting right under your desk. If you love tinkering with hardware, or honestly, if you just want to finally understand how all these random parts actually work together, this explainer is absolutely for you. We're going to completely break down the PC hardware and operating system installation technician handbook and just map out the whole process. Because let's be real, it is so easy to look at a completed build and just see a mysterious glowing black box. But today, we're going to look at the desktop PC as what it really is, a giant, highly logical puzzle made of perfectly interconnected parts. It is a machine that is literally designed to be opened up, upgraded, and repaired by you. All right, so here is our game plan for today. Part 1, inside the desktop PC. 2, essential tools and safety. 3, the teardown process. And finally, 4, building your PC. Okay, let's dive right into this with Section 1. Inside the desktop PC, mapping the anatomy. First up, just a super quick foundational refresher on how the physical and digital worlds actually interact. So, we all know hardware, right? That's the physical stuff, the circuitry, the chips you can actually touch. But here's the thing. It relies entirely on firmware. That is the super low-level software that's permanently embedded right into a chip. Without firmware to wake it up and configure it when you hit that power button, your hardware is basically just an expensive paperweight. When you look at how all this hardware is physically laid out inside a typical ATX computer case, it really is a masterpiece of efficiency. That massive green rectangle right in the center, that's your motherboard. Think of it as the central nervous system. Down on the bottom right, you've got the power supply unit, or PSU, basically acting as the heart, pumping electricity to absolutely everything else. Add in some fans for intake and exhaust and a few bays for your storage drives, and you've got the whole ecosystem. So here is a quick cheat sheet for the major organs. The CPU, that's the brain, executing all the instructions. The RAM acts as your high-speed working memory. But because RAM is volatile, meaning it completely forgets everything when the power cuts out, we rely on our storage, like an SSD or a hard drive, to actually hold onto the operating system and your files long-term. And, wrapping it all up, the PSU ties everything together by converting wall power into perfectly regulated energy for the system. Now, zooming in really closely on that central nervous system, the motherboard, you can see exactly where all these crucial pieces plug in. Right there in the upper left center, you've got this large CPU socket, flanked by those vertical slots for your RAM. Down below, you'll find the long PCIe expansion slots, which is where your graphics card goes. And surrounding all of that are the little headers for power and data. Literally everything routes back to this single critical board. All right, moving on to Section 2, Essential Tools and Safety, prepping the operating room. Okay, we need to slow down for a second because we have to talk about the invisible killer of PC parts, electrostatic discharge, or ESD. You guys, a static shock that is way too small for you to even feel can instantly fry or silently weaken a semiconductor component. This is exactly why clipping an anti-static wrist strap onto the bare metal of your unplugged case is 100% mandatory. It keeps your body at the exact same electrical potential as the chassis. Just do it. And speaking of safety, here is the absolutely crucial point. Never, ever open a power supply unit's metal casing, period. The capacitors inside that box can store massive, potentially lethal amounts of electrical energy long after the computer is unplugged from the wall. If your PSU is acting up, you replace the entire unit. We never, ever play surgeon on the power supply itself. With that understood, let's get into the fun stuff. Section 3, the teardown process, a 13-step surgical removal. Phase 1 is all about isolation. You shut down the OS, switch off the PSU in the back, and unplug the cable from the wall. Now here's a great pro technician tip for you. Once it's completely unplugged, hold down the computer's front power button for about 10 seconds. That drains away any lingering standby charge. Once the system is truly dead, you pop off the side panel, take some photos so you remember where every cable goes, and then gently disconnect them. Remember, pull the plastic plugs, not the wires themselves. Next up, we start pulling the core components, basically working from the outside in. First, take out that heavy graphics card, but be super careful to push down the plastic latch on the slot before you pull. After that, extract your storage drives and the RAM. Then comes the really delicate part. You gently twist off the CPU cooler to break that sticky thermal paste seal, and carefully lift out the processor by its edges. Listen to me on this one. Never touch the gold contacts on the bottom of the CPU, and absolutely never touch the incredibly fragile little pins inside the motherboard socket. Finally, we extract the last remaining parts. Unscrew the heavy power supply and slide it right out. Disconnect those tiny, almost irritatingly delicate front panel cables, the ones that control your power button and LEDs, and then carefully remove the motherboard itself. Oh, and I really want to emphasize step 13 here. Put your screws into labeled containers. I'm completely serious. Just one loose screw rolling around behind your motherboard during reassembly can cause a deadly short circuit later on. All right, we've torn it down. Let's move to section 4, building your PC, bringing the machine to life. Before you start screwing components back in, you need to be hyper aware of your standoffs. Those are the little metal pegs that the motherboard actually sits on. A super common and honestly fatal beginner mistake is leaving a random unused standoff screwed into the case. If that little metal peg touches the exposed circuits on the back of your motherboard when you power it on, bam, you've permanently shorted out your system. So only install the standoffs that perfectly match the mounting holes on your specific board. Okay, let's lay the foundation and see how this builds back up. You want to do this outside the case on a safe anti-static surface. Open up the motherboard socket and just drop the processor in, perfectly flat. Don't force it at all, just use the little alignment notches to guide you. Once it's seated, apply just a tiny pea-sized dot of thermal paste right in the middle that fills any microscopic air gaps, and melt the CPU cooler directly on top. Next up, we snap in the active memory. Align up the little notch on the RAM sticks and press down firmly and evenly until both ends click and lock into place. Fun fact, a partially seated RAM stick is literally the #1 reason a newly built PC refuses to turn on, so make sure it clicks. Once the brain and memory are installed, you just carefully lower that entire central nervous system into the empty chassis, screw it down, and then slide in your power supply and your storage drives. Now we wire the nervous system up, slot in that heavy graphics card, and then grab the massive 24-pin ATX power cable. Here is a totally essential technique. When you push that huge connector into the motherboard, put your fingers under the back edge of the board to support it. If you don't, you can actually bend and snap the whole circuit board. Yikes. After that, route your CPU power cable, your SATA data cables for the drives, and very carefully plug in those tiny front panel headers, using your motherboard manual as your map. Now, before you go plugging things into the power supply, please remember this massive warning. If you have a modular power supply, meaning the cables detach, you can never mix cables from different brands or even different models from the same brand. Seriously, even if the plug physically fits into your component, the pin layout on the power supply end isn't standardized. If you mix them, you could accidentally send 12 volts down a 5-volt line and literally fry your brand new hardware in a millisecond. Only use the specific cables that came in the box. All right, we finish up our surgical build with the final touches, plugging in the front USB ports, the audio headers, and hooking up the case fans. And then, cable management. You route everything cleanly behind the motherboard tray using zip ties or Velcro straps. And look, this isn't just to make the inside look pretty. Keeping that main chamber clear of wires ensures proper airflow so your parts don't overheat, and it completely guarantees you won't accidentally crush a cable when you slide the side panel back on. And there you have it, the final result, a fully assembled, perfectly working machine. The cables are tucked away, the cooler is tightly seated, the graphics card is locked in, and the power supply is primed and ready. It is just such a beautifully logical system where every single part has a defined purpose and an exact place. It's a totally successful surgery. So, we've mapped the anatomy, learned the strict safety rules, stripped a system down to its bare screws, and built the whole shebang back up. You literally have the roadmap to the hardware sitting right under your desk now. So, my final question for you is this. Now that you actually know the anatomy and how this all goes together, what are you going to upgrade first? Are you going to throw in some more RAM, swap out that graphics card? Take charge of your own machine. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this explainer, and hey, happy building.